Welcome back to another Explainer. Today, we're taking a sledgehammer to everything you thought you knew about the fairness of Mother Nature. I mean, have you ever watched the news, seen a devastating hurricane or a massive earthquake, and just thought, well, that's just an unavoidable force of nature, nothing we could do? Today, we're going to unpack the data to show you why that perspective might actually be hiding a much deeper human-driven issue. It seems like common sense, right? A hurricane or an earthquake doesn't check your bank account before it hits, but we're going to see why that assumption is actually a really dangerous misconception. The reality, drawn straight from the research, is that natural disasters absolutely do discriminate. Their impacts are not even close to being evenly distributed across the globe. By the end of this explainer, you're going to see exactly why the poorest countries are consistently the primary victims, and why we really need to rethink our entire approach to these events. So let's dive right into section 1 and completely redefine this whole concept of a quote-unquote natural disaster. Here's the thing. Earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, storms, floods, those are just natural hazards. It's the planet doing its thing. But they only become disasters when they slam into human systems. The rain falling or the earth shaking isn't the disaster itself. The disaster is what happens when that hazard hits a fragile, unprepared community. The physical event is natural, sure, but the catastrophic impact is almost entirely shaped by human infrastructure. Think about it like this. When a storm rolls in, it hits everyone. But if your country has weak infrastructure, that same storm is going to absolutely obliterate roads and hospitals. No early warning systems, people literally don't know they need to get out. And if your entire economy relies heavily on farming, well, one bad drought or flood can wipe out a year's livelihood in a snap. It's not about how hard the wind blows, folks. It's about the weakness of the safety net. Which brings us to section 2, the geography of vulnerability. Let's look at how this builds into something called environmental inequality. Environmental inequality basically means that the poorest people are stuck facing the absolute highest risks, but they've got the fewest resources to fall back on. It's a brutal double whammy. It's about exposure, who is physically in the path of danger, and capacity, who actually has the money and infrastructure to bounce back once the danger has passed. And this isn't just an abstract idea. It's physically baked into the land we live on. Think about how a city develops. The safest land, the areas high above sea level, far away from crumbling slopes, that land is almost always claimed by wealthier groups, which essentially pushes low-income communities right into the high-risk floodplains and hillsides. They aren't living there by choice. They've literally been economically priced out of safety. Okay, moving into section 3, let's look at some real-world disaster divides to prove this isn't just theory. Let's rewind to 2016. Hurricane Matthew, a monster of a storm. In Haiti, it caused a truly heartbreaking 470-plus deaths. Just a massive, devastating blow to a country already wrestling with severe economic and infrastructure challenges. But here is the wild part. Neighboring Cuba was hit by the exact same storm, and they reported absolutely 0 fatalities. 0. I mean, how is that even possible? 2 countries, same region, exact same wind speeds and storm surges, yet the outcomes are night and day. Well, it comes down to this side-by-side comparison. Haiti was dealing with vulnerable infrastructure and just didn't have the government capacity to mobilize a response. Cuba, on the other hand, had robust early warnings, super coordinated evacuation systems, and really strict building codes. This proves brilliantly that the death toll wasn't about the weather. It was entirely about policy and preparedness. The hazard was natural, the disaster was man-made. Unfortunately, surviving the initial storm is kind of just the beginning, which brings us to section 4, the vicious cycle. There's this fascinating research from UNU-WIDER that proves disasters don't just put economic progress on pause, they actively throw it in reverse for the people already struggling. They found that events like massive forest fires significantly widen rural income disparities. You can literally measure it using the Gini coefficient. The wealth gap gets visibly worse in the aftermath of a hazard. And so you get this trap. It starts with high socioeconomic inequality. A disaster strikes the most vulnerable folks, their homes are destroyed, their income plummets, and boom, you're left with even greater inequality, which, of course, makes them even more vulnerable for the next storm. It is a terrifying compounding loop. And let's not forget the ripple effects. We usually just focus on the immediate damage, houses blown down, but the secondary impacts are just as deadly. When the water supply collapses, disease spreads. When crops are ruined, hunger follows. When the local clinic is wiped out, suddenly a minor injury becomes life-threatening. Poorer populations bear the brunt of these cascading failures because they completely lack the backup systems wealthier nations take for granted. Now let's look at Section 5, Climate Injustice. Because a changing climate is basically pouring gasoline on this already unfair dynamic. Take the devastating monsoon floods in Pakistan a little while back. Massive economic ruin, huge loss of life. Yet, historically speaking, Pakistan has contributed a microscopic fraction of the global greenhouse gases driving these extreme events. It is a stark, textbook definition of climate injustice. The countries that did the least to cause the problem are absorbing the absolute heaviest blows. And the climate models show this gap is only going to stretch further. Driven by higher population growth in poor nations, it just means more and more vulnerable people are going to be living right in the crosshairs of future heat waves and droughts. We aren't just dealing with a current imbalance, we are looking down the barrel of an escalating trend. But listen, this isn't a lost cause. In Section 6, let's talk about pathways to resilience and how we actually fix this. Here is our roadmap out of the trap. First up, we need hardcore investments in resilient infrastructure and early warning systems everywhere. Second, wealthier nations, the high historical emitters, need to step up with international climate finance and tech transfers. And finally, we have to bake environmental justice into all our development planning. By addressing the underlying social inequalities, we can actually empower communities to withstand these shocks. So I want to leave you with this thought to wrap up our explainer today. Disasters are social, not just natural. The rain's going to fall, the ground's going to shake, the wind will blow. We cannot stop the hazards, but as we've seen, the disasters themselves, they are created by policy choices, economic structures, and social inequalities, which means the power to prevent them is entirely in our hands. So if human systems create the disasters, aren't human systems the only way to prevent them? Thanks for joining me today. Keep questioning everything, and I'll see you in the next one.